In Maine, did you have, like, I know in California there were some sheriffs who just said we're not going to enforce these lockdowns and mask rules. And was there any local law enforcement who wouldn't enforce it? Was Maine particularly bad in actually trying to enforce this and keep everything shut down? Was it a heavy hand? I know, like in New York, Governor Cuomo was threatening businesses and almost mafia style with his threats against them. What was Maine like in terms of that?
There were certainly threats against businesses. It did depend on where you were, I think. And at some point, the state caught up. I was living out in a rural area, even in southern Maine at the time. And from my commute into the coastal area near Portland to back home, you could see the different views of folks and how much they really cared for the social distancing and all things like that. And so as the summer of 2020 progressed, a lot of those businesses in those small towns were visited by the CDC or the governor's office. At the time, it was under a civil state of emergency. And I think that's a whole nother can of worms that states have to contend with, is how much power do you give the executive branch in these times? And does the executive branch get to just make all of these rules because they decide we're in an emergency? And so this is the follow-up with that. They end up cracking down on some of these businesses. It was interesting. There was a state representative who has since moved away, but his wife was running a coffee shop just down the street in our capital city from the CDC office. And you can imagine they got a few visits. And I think it was just because he was there, wrong place, wrong time. He's speaking out against it. And to me, it was transparent that the state was just targeting people based on what they were saying and what they were representing. So even though there were plenty of medical exemptions and there were plenty of documentation and all of these things, they didn't care. And I think it was that laid it all bare, that they'll say, okay, so it's all for health and safety, but even if you have a medical exemption, we're still going to steamroll that. And that philosophy carried all the way through to the state vaccine mandates and all of this. And it's just, you just see the seed of that planted, where they just threw away all the guidance and then just plowed forward with this in 2020.